Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Alright, so we are going to continue with our set of videos. Of course, this is the first video in the set where we are going to set up a Galera cluster, and later on we are going to set up a second data center Galera cluster, and then we will try to set up a replication between the two sides using MaxScale's binlog router. And to get all that done, we are going to be using the latest MariaDB 10.5 enterprise server, and of course the MaxScale 2.5, because MaxScale 2.5 has the new improved binlog router, and the Galera 10.5 enterprise has something new as well. That is a consistent GTID support. So the versions before 10.5 did not have a consistent GTID support. It does have GTID, but there were no guarantees that all the nodes in the cluster will have a consistent GTID, right? So, but with this release, they have improved that, and now we are happy to report that all the nodes in the cluster will have a consistent GTID, regardless of where you update or where you do the transaction from. It will have the GTID will be replicated as a part of the data package as well, and we will see exactly how to set up all that in this particular session. And eventually, once you have this cluster set up, we are going to be extending this cluster to a second data center, and yeah, we will eventually get what we wanted to achieve, to have asynchronous application between two Galera clusters on two data centers, right? So let's get on with the business. Not this one, yeah, this one. All right, so I have 4 VMs currently set up, one for MaxScale and then three for three Galera nodes, of course. So if you look at the architecture, of course, we have two MaxScales here, which is the ideal way of setting it up. But once you know how to set up one MaxScale, the second MaxScale is going to be exactly the same setup. So you just duplicate the setup, whatever you have done for one MaxScale, we just simply duplicate it for the other MaxScale node, and for Galera cluster that works fine. But if you have a normal primary replica or a master slave setup going on, then we cannot simply duplicate the MaxScale configurations, because there are some additional things that we need to take care of. But since we are doing Galera, we can just simply duplicate the MaxScale config on the other side and have them both running at the same time without any problems, right? So before we start, let me just increase the font a little bit so that it's readable, right? Okay, so if we check the host name, so we have MaxScale 70 here, and host name for these three nodes, we have 71, 72, and 73, right? So we have these three nodes for Galera and one node for MaxScale. Of course, I don't have anything installed as of now, but I do have the repositories already set up. The repository is pointing to, of course, MariaDB enterprise version. I will put up a link in the video description on how to get that. Yeah, so just follow along. And yeah, of course, I also have a GitHub link that has all this process documented in detail, step by step. I will be putting that link to my GitHub readme file with all these videos, of course, right? So let's get on with it. So first of all, on this particular server, we are going to install MaxScale, not maxcdl, yum -y install MaxScale, let it go. And then on the other servers, we are also going to install MariaDB server, and then MariaDB backup, and then Galera. Yep, this one. Right, so that's all. So we are going to install these three packages on these three servers, and of course all the dependencies will be installed automatically for us. You can see that we are installing 10.5 and Galera 4.5, right? 26.4.5. Same thing is being installed on all the three servers right now. The MaxScale setup is already done. All right, we can just leave it there as it is. Let's wait for it to finish. Almost there. Okay, awesome. So server has been installed successfully. Then I'm just quickly going to verify rpm-qa pipe grep -I MariaDB. We should have those 5 binaries installed. So we have compact, common, client, backup, and server, of course, and not forgetting about Galera, of course. rpm-qa grep Galera. Yep, there it is. So all the 6 RPMs are already there, which means our server installation is done on all the 3 nodes. So let's quickly verify the config file or the server.cnf file, my.cnf.d/server.cnf. So this is the default config file for MariaDB server. If you see that is the default config file, of course. So we are not going to type all the config by hand because that's wasting time. So if you look at it here, we have this server.cnf file already here. I've prepared it in advance so that we don't waste time doing that. So I'm just simply going to copy this file to the target location, etc my.cnf.d/ yeah, over here. All right, so if we quickly vi that file one more time, then we can see the config is all in place. So everything is defined within the Galera section. So we are going to go through all these properties one by one so that we explain what these configurations mean. So if you, so of course the first one is to enable the Galera replication that is there. WSREP on is equal to on, so it's enabled. Then we are enabling the Galera GTID mode. So this is what we are talking about earlier. So this will enable a consistent GTID support across Galera. So WSREP GTID mode is equal to on, so we have enabled it. And then we are also enabling Galera domain ID, right? So this is super important. So we are enabling the Galera domain GTID, and then if you see that the domain GTID is consistent across all the nodes, right? So this one, and this one, they are all pointing to 70, which is what we want, to have a consistent GTID, to have a consistent domain ID for every server. And if you look at the WSREP provider, this is basically pointing to the Galera library, right? So the actual Galera library. So if you look at it, this one is pointing to the Galera enterprise-4 libgalera enterprise.so file. So this is specific to the enterprise server, but if you are using the community version, the file name and the path name will be different. So I have that documented in the readme file that I talked about earlier. So I'll be putting up the link in the description so that you can refer to it to find out the actual location. But generally speaking, you can simply go to a user lib64 and then just do a find for galera.so. So Galera and extension should be so. So whatever file you find there, that should be put here as the WSREP provider. And then of course the cluster address. So we because we have 3 nodes cluster, we are going to put those IP addresses here, 71, 72, and 73. So this parameter is again same for all the 3 nodes, right? So you can see that it's identical for all 3 nodes. This is something that we have commented out right now, but I will be explaining about that. So it's basically just to define what method of SST is supposed to be used. So SST stands for system state transfer. So this happens whenever a server goes out of sync and there is no way for Galera to replicate the data. So Galera will automatically initiate a system state transfer where it will, if it is defined to use Maria backup, so Galera will basically run Maria backup on one of the nodes, one of these 3 nodes, whichever are available. It will run Maria backup on those nodes and transfer that backup to the other node that requires the data and restore that backup over there, and basically automatically build that server from scratch one more time, synchronizing the data while doing it. So that method is Maria backup. So if you are using Maria backup, the particular node that is replicating or that is running Maria backup, or that is basically the donor node for this particular activity, will be still accessible by Maxscale or by the user. So user can still do transaction like DDLs or DML, whatever he want to do. He can still do all those things over there. But if it is commented out, then the default method is rsync. So Galera will be using rsync to synchronize the data, or rather sending the entire data directly to the new node, or to the node that needs that data. So because rsync is not database aware, so to get a consistent rsync copy, Galera will basically detach that particular node or the donor node from the cluster. So that being said, that would mean that the donor node will no longer be accessible by any users or Maxscale or any other connections. So that node will no longer be accessible while that rsync is going on. So that's the main difference between the two approaches. So of course, the recommended way is to use Maria backup, but since we are just setting it up for the first time, we would also need to create a backup user and of course a password to put in this particular config file. So that's why I have it here, but it's currently commented, so that we will define it to use rsync for now. So once we have everything set up, we will create a backup user, and then we will uncomment this portion so that Galera can use that user account, this particular user account, right? So we will see how that works out later on in the next few videos. But anyway, so if you scroll down, so this local node setup is basically pointing to this particular server. So if you see, every node has a different value, right? So this one is local node address. For this one, this node is 72, and similarly for this node is 73. And of course the same thing goes for the name. The name can be anything that you want to put up for this particular server. So I'm just using the host name, so that because that makes sense to me, so I'm just using the host name. It's up to you, whatever you want to call this node, you are free to do that. So just to take note that these two things are pointing to that specific node that we are configuring right now. All right, so if you scroll down, this is something interesting, that this will basically enable data streaming for larger transactions on the Galera cluster. So if let's say you are doing a very large transaction, maybe you are basically updating a million rows or in one update statement, or maybe you are inserting a million records in one insert statement. Maybe you are just selecting from one table, inserting into another table, and that happens to be inserting a million rows into your target table. In this case, Galera basically will split that transaction into 1,000 rows each, and then start streaming as soon as the data becomes available. So it's good in a way that Galera will not wait for your transaction to complete on the server wherever you're running it on, and it will not wait for it to complete before sending the data, but it will immediately start sending or start streaming that data to the clients, to the other nodes. So in this way, your transition can be completed in a faster way. If you don't have this this fragment transaction fragmentation enabled, if you don't have these enabled, then it will basically slow down your bigger transactions, because it will have to wait for them to complete before sending the data to those other nodes in the cluster. Just a quick note, this unit can be defined as bytes or rows, right? So if you define it as bytes, the second parameter, which points to size, will be denoting the size of that transaction, right? So if you have, let's say, define this in bytes, then whatever number you put here will basically mean that that many bytes you want to stream. So your transaction may be 1 gigabyte, then you are asking to break that 1 gigabyte transaction into 10,000 bytes each, and stream that data to the target node. But for me, I'm just using the rows because that makes more sense to me, and it's more controllable, in other words, right? So and this one is probably one of the more important parameters, because most of the times the installations I have seen, clients totally ignore this Galera cache parameter, right? So this is something very, very important. So if you remember previously, we have discussed that there is something called an SST, the system state transfer. So let's say whenever one of the nodes in the cluster goes out of the cluster because of some problem or some maintenance work, and that the node remains out of the cluster maybe for 2 or 3 hours, for example, right? So and within that time, the other nodes will continue to receive new data, right? So let's say the 73 nodes goes out of the cluster for some maintenance work. You are doing some upgrades or whatnot. I don't know what you're trying to do, but you may be doing some sort of maintenance, and then you bring this node out of the cluster for maintenance. But in the meantime, these two nodes will continue to get new transaction. So let's say we are getting transactions in the form of for example 1 GB per hour, for example, right? So 1 GB per hour you are getting the transaction into this cluster. So that would mean that in 3 hours you will basically get 3 GB of data, and in 5 hours you will get roughly around 5 GB of data, new data in your cluster. So let's say this node goes out of the cluster for 10 hours, right? So something goes wrong while upgrade, and then it took longer than expected, and then the node went out of the cluster for like 10 hours. So, and then your Galera cache is defined for 5 GB, right? So this 5 GB means that whatever data is coming into the cluster, Galera will record that data in its local cache, right? So if let's say we know that our data is growing in the form of 5 GB or 1 GB per hour, and it means that this Galera cache of 5 GB will be able to hold the data for 5 hours, right? So it will have data for the last 5 hours or so. So in that case, if the node that went out of the cluster is able to join back the cluster within those 5 hours time, Galera will be able to send the data from the cache to that new node. So that is called an IST instead of SST. That is called IST. IST means incremental state transfer, right? And that is a much faster way of replicating data or synchronizing data to a particular node. And the second scenario would be if your node remains out of the cluster for more than 5 hours. That would mean that your data, the data that is required by this node when it tries to join back, is no longer available in this 5 GB cache, because this 5 GB cache can only hold data for the last 5 hours, for example, right? But it depends. This 5 GB may be very large for you, for your particular application. So this 5 GB may be able to hold 24 hours of data for your application, but my example is like this 5 GB can only hold data for 5 hours, for example. So if your node goes out of the cluster for 10 hours and then it tries to join back after 10 hours, then Galera will know immediately that the data that this node is requesting for is no longer available in this Galera cache. So it will initiate the SST. Instead of IST, it will have to initiate SST, a full system state transfer. So this is super important to understand that if let's say your database is like 2 terabytes in size, then you can imagine taking a backup of 2 terabytes and sending it over to the new node and then restoring that backup is going to take a couple of hours or even more than that, right? So depending on how fast is your storage and how fast is your network, it is going to take a long time to do that. So contrast to that, if let's say your G cache is defined maybe like 15 GB or 20 GB, then we are sure that within that 10 hours or even 12 or 15 hours data will be available in the local cache. So instead of sending 2 terabyte of data, it's only going to be sending 15 GB of data to that node that requires that data, and it is a much faster way of recovery basically. So it's super important to have this parameter configured based on your application and your downtime requirements. I would suggest to have this configured to store at least 12 or 24 hours of data, depending on your application workloads, right? All right, moving forward, bin log format equals to row. So by default, Galera does not require bin logs, and you will not see this parameter enabled in a Galera installation, right? You will not have bin logs enabled on a cluster, but it's still recommended for point-in-time recovery. So that's why this configuration is good for any installation, whether you want to extend it to have multi-data center or you want to use it on a single data center. So this config is still good for that. So I encourage you to follow this. And then this one, log slave updates, is also important. That this will basically ensures that whatever GTIDs or whatever transactions are being done on one node are repeated on the other node as well, to log its own transaction in the bin logs, right? So this log slave update will be the one generating local bin logs for the other nodes, right? So we know for sure that because we have bin logs enabled, so whatever you do on one particular node, you will have those transactions recorded in the bin log file, right, for that node. But having this enabled will also ensure that those transactions are also recorded in the other nodes bin logs. So that is super important for recovery in case, let's say, all your nodes are down and you have access to only one node. But so you will still need to make sure that your bin logs are available on that node, and this will make sure of that to have local binary logs available on all the nodes. And this is also important to have a consistent GTID, right? So this, just follow this config and we'll be good. Okay, so this is the standard domain ID for a normal master slave or primary replica setup, not related to Galera. But the requirement for this parameter is to have it defined uniquely for all the nodes. That's why if you see this domain ID is defined uniquely 71, 72, and 73, but this parameter is not really used for Galera GTID. Galera GTID will only use these two parameters. The domain ID, of course, that's already there. So this is a Galera domain ID, right? So that we already defined to 70 for all the nodes. And also it is going to be using this server ID. So server ID, again, you will see server ID is also consistent for all the nodes. Let me synchronize the cursor one more time. Yeah, there it is. So we can see that this server ID is also synchronized to be 7000 for all the nodes. But if you remember, for a normal master slave setup or a primary replica setup, we need to have a unique server ID for each server. But Galera is different. So Galera, we want to have a consistent or a same value for the server ID, because Galera, all the nodes are equal in every way. That is why the server ID will have to be same for all the nodes, right? So just keep that in mind. The only thing that we need to define differently is or uniquely is the GTID domain ID. Basically everything else is consistent, it is similar in all the nodes for a particular cluster. All right, so moving forward, then we have the default storage engine InnoDB, because we know Galera can only use InnoDB for its replication. So if you have any other table created in using another storage engine, that cannot be replicated using Galera. So just keep that in mind. Every table should be InnoDB. Then there are some parameters on performance of auto increment numbers. So Galera requires to have this lock mode to set to 2 for best performance, and flush log at transaction commit. So that this means that we are basically disabling the flush log at transaction at every commit. So because we are setting it to 0, that means we are leaving it to the normal database checkpoint. So whenever the checkpoint happens every 1 or 2 minutes, the log will be flushed in that time. But if you look at best practices, having this set to 0, meaning we are not safe, meaning our database is not safe. It can lose some data if, let's say, the server meaning we have a power failure. So there are chances of data loss, because the data might not have been committed to the disk, to the files. So it is recommended to keep it at 1, but that is only true for a master slave setup or a normal setup. But for Galera, it is recommended to keep it as 0, because 0, first of all, 0 is much faster. And the other thing is that because Galera uses synchronous replication, and the way of committing transaction in Galera is already guaranteeing that our data is already saved on other nodes. So even if due to some reason that data is not committed to disk, we are assured that the data is committed on some other node. So whenever this node is recovers from a crash, it will automatically get that data synchronized from other nodes automatically. We don't need to worry about that. So just keep that to 0. That will certainly improve your transaction per second on a heavy server. And buffer pool size, very important for any InnoDB setup. Buffer pool size is the largest data structure for the MariaDB server, and this is recommended to have or to set to 70% of your total memory of your server, or total RAM of your server. But my setup is 1 GB RAM for each VM, so that's why I have just given it 50% of total memory, because I don't have enough memory available to allocate 70% to just buffer pool. So just calculate accordingly. And log file is also very important for transaction, where for servers where we are doing a lot of large transaction that requires a lot of data storage. So it's good to have a large enough log file size, so that you don't flush data to disk, or don't flush data to disk very frequently. In other words, so having a large log file size will help improve your write performance on your InnoDB server. Max allowed packet size, again, is this one is specific to every connection, so just calculate this very carefully. If let's say you give it a very large number, um, and you have many connections connecting to the server, they all can end up consuming this much amount of memory of your server, and then you may run out of memory for that server, and then your server will crash eventually. So just keep that in mind. This is basically used if you have if you are consistently using blobs to update or insert, or maybe you are doing very large transaction in one statement. So if you have large enough packet size, so that your transaction can go as one packet instead of multiple packets, so that improves performance a lot. If you have a very small packet size, and then your transaction is consistently sending data in hundreds of megabytes, then you may have, meaning the server may have to use multiple packets and multiple round trips, so that can consume some or create some performance issues. So this is good for performance to have a large enough packet size, but still not so large that you can run out of memory. Just keep that in mind. And yeah, I think that's all there is for as far as the config is concerned. So I think we are good to go. I hope I was able to explain all these properties, and then you now understand all this in a better way. So I'm going to save and exit, not save and exit, but just exit from these three nodes, and let's start our cluster. So this one I'm just going to just leave it there, and I'm going to disable my broadcasting because I don't want it anymore. Yeah. Okay, so now how do you start your Galera cluster? So that's something important. But you need to pick up one node that you want to bootstrap. So Galera works on the basis of bootstrapping. So you need to pick up one node and bootstrap that node to become your starting point for the Galera cluster, right? So let's do that. How do you do that? Just simply pick up a node and do Galera new cluster, right? So that's all. So just press enter, and we have a cluster running already. So if we do MariaDB -u root, and let's check the version first. Select version. Yeah, we are using 5.5 enterprise server. That's good. Let's check the Galera status. Show not variable status, remember, WSREP cluster size. All right, so the cluster size is currently reported as 1, so which means that our cluster has been bootstrapped, and this particular node is the first node of the cluster, right? So the other nodes, you don't need to start specially or in a particular way. You just simply say, so just simply start the node as per normal, right? So let us start, and then we will check this one more time. Right, and yeah, we have 2 nodes reported, so I'm going to start this node as well. And we will check, eventually we'll check this. Alrighty, and yep, so we have 3 node Galera cluster currently running, and everything looks fine. All right, so this is how you start a new cluster. But let's say if you want to shut these nodes down, how do you shut down? So basically there's nothing special about it. So for stopping your server, you just simply use the same normal way. Just simply systemctl stop MariaDB on systemd servers, of course, and similarly, but if let's say okay, let's do that. I will stop this node, and then I will stop MariaDB and stop MariaDB. All right, so my nodes are all down. All right, so let's say now you want to start the cluster. So now again, we need to, when we start the cluster, we need to start it using Galera new cluster, right? Because we want to bootstrap that cluster from one particular node. Well, let us do that. Galera new cluster. Let's see what happens. And yep, as expected, the node is not able to start. There is a very specific reason for that. So some somebody new to Galera normally suffers or struggles at this point when they shut down the cluster already for the first time, then they are not able to start it up, right? So let's see what exactly is reported by the journal. If you scroll up, so of course we are seeing it failed to initialize the plugins and all that, so many things going wrong. And yeah, so we look at it. So it says it may not be safe to bootstrap the cluster from this node, right? It was not the last node to leave the cluster. So this is a very important point. So if you remember, we shut down this node first, then this node, and the last node that we stopped was this particular node, right? So that is what it is reporting, that it's not safe to start the cluster from this node because this node may not have the latest transaction, because the cluster of course doesn't know that other node may have already received new transaction while the cluster was shutting down. The other nodes might have received new transaction which are missing from this node. So it's not safe to bootstrap or start the cluster from this particular node. So we have to find out now, we have to find out which was a node that was shut down last. So it is possible that maybe your colleague has shut down this cluster, so you don't know which was the last node which stopped. So let's do that very quickly. I'll show you exactly how to do that. So I'm going to just broadcast to this group. Alrighty, so if you go to wirelib, your data directory, right, you go to this folder. There is a file called grstat. Yeah, this one, grastat. So this is the Galera statistics table, statistics file. So this is available on all the nodes, we can see that. So let's do a cat of this file. All right, and you see here, this is the Galera saved state. So this particular number, UUID, is the unique identifier for the transaction. So this one says that all this number is or this ID is the same for all the nodes, which is a good sign, which means that all the nodes have the same data at the time of shutdown. And then the second one is sequence number. So we have to look for the node that has a larger sequence number. So that is the node, safest node to start from, right? So this node is reported to have the larger sequence number, of course, and this node should be the safest one to start the cluster from. But the thing that is very important is this safe to bootstrap, right? So whichever node reports safe to bootstrap 1, right, so that is the node where you should start from. So if you remember, our shutdown process was basically shut down this node first, then this node, and then finally this node. So that is why this node is reporting to have safe to bootstrap 1, and of course the sequence number is also the highest, even though the data or unique identifier for the transaction is identical, right? So that is something important to take note. So our UUID is consistent, is identical, which means that we should be basically okay to start from any node, but Galera will not let us do that. Galera will force us to start the cluster from this particular node. All right, so we will do that. Oops, I need to disable my grouping very quickly. All right, Galera new cluster, and this should be able to start up. Yeah, it does. And start MariaDB and start MariaDB. Right, so the other nodes we start normally, and then if we go to if we enable the grouping one more time and we log into the server and show status like cluster size, and we can see that we are basically seeing a cluster size of 3 from all the nodes, right? Okay, so now the server is running. Let's go back to that folder. If we check the grastat file now, you will see that all the nodes basically have sequence number of -1, and the bootstrap is also 0 for all the nodes, right? So if let's say your cluster crashes at this particular state, there may be some disaster, the power might have failed on the server, and then you don't have a backup power plan, or something can go wrong very seriously, and then your server just abruptly goes down without a proper shutdown, right? So when that happens, and when the server power is restored and you come back to the server, and then you want to find out, okay, which node is the one that I should start from, right? So that's again the question. But you will see that all the sequence number will be -1, what you see here as of now, and all the bootstrap will be 0 as well. So this is the point where everyone will be panicking, right? So what do we do now? How do we start the server? There's no need to panic as long as this number is the same for all the nodes, which means that your data is consistent at the time of crash as well. If let's say that the numbers are not consistent, then you can run the Galera recovery. So there's a tool called Galera recovery. You can run that to recover the last transaction. That should solve the problem. But still, your bootstrap will be set to 0 for all the nodes, right? So now the only way remaining is basically to pick up a node. Let's say I want to pick up this node, and then uvi that file grstat, and simply set this number to 1. That's it. Set this number to 1, save and exit, and then now you should be able to do Galera new cluster from that node, right? So there's no need to panic. You can just simply manually update this file and set this save to bootstrap to 1, and then start your cluster from that point, right? So the remaining process is exactly the same. All right, so I think enough talking about that. If let's say we connect here and then show databases, let's create a database very quickly. TestDB, for example, and TestDB tab ID serial, and then we are creating a table. Of course, we know that this table is created as InnoDB table, and insert into tab C1, select let's say we select some dummy data from the columns table in the data dictionary table, information schema dot columns, and then select the column name and insert into our tab column 1. All right, so we have this many rows inserted. So now if I go to if I go here and show databases, I can see the test database is already replicated here. STB from tab. Indeed, we can see that those 2244 rows have been replicated. Same thing should be applicable here as well. Alrighty, so it's confirmed, the replication works fine, everything is working. If I quit from MariaDB now, and because if you remember, we did enable bin logs, right? So let's do a verification on that. cd var lib mysql, we go to the data directory, of course, and check for that, and then we can see that the Galera bin has been created for all the server, right? So we can see that Galera bin has been created for all the nodes. And if we let me disable grouping one more time. If I check this one, so how do you check your bin logs contents? MySQL bin log -v to verbose and this particular guy. Yep. So if we scroll up, we can already see those transactions that we insert into tab, and then this one is basically reporting all the transactions as single statements that they are recorded there in the bin log. Because our bin log is row based, so all the rows, whatever is being inserted, is being recorded here in the bin log. Because we are doing -v, -v will show us a readable format, but if you don't do a -v, you will see that we get a hash of that. This is what you will see normally, but if you do -v, then that will give you a readable values for that particular row set. Same thing if we check the last bin log is 72 here and bin log 3. So if you do let's say MySQL bin log minus v and one, you will see the same thing appearing here, right? So the last number you see 6732, the same thing we are seeing here as well. That C2 column is C1, and then yep, and that's it. So and then of course the previous one was ID. Over here also the previous one is ID. The same thing we should be able to see on this server as well. The last bin log is this one, minus v, and yep, absolutely. So we can see all that data recorded in the bin logs and should have a consistent GTID already. All right, so I think we have seen how to quickly install Galera cluster and then how to enable replication, and how easy it is to set up a 3-node cluster. It just depends on your config file. You need to have an identical config file with only a few parameters to differ, mainly your GTID domain ID needs to be different on all the nodes, and of course your server or node specific parameters like the ones that we seen, like the server name and the node name and the node IP address, of course. So if we look at that one more time, server.cnf file, so everything is identical. The only thing different would be these two parameters, right? So these two parameters for sure you need to have different for all the nodes specific to that server. The rest everything again is the same, and the only thing different would be this one as well. So these are the only three parameters that you need to define differently for all the nodes, right? All right, so I think we are done with this video. The next video we are going to be setting up MaxScale. We have already installed it. If not, then we will install it in the next video and configure it to use to basically be able to manage this cluster of 3 nodes and do our transition read write, splitting, and failover and all that stuff. So we will set MaxScale up to do all that good stuff, and then in the next coming videos we will set up the MaxScale to enable binlog on the MaxScale server 2.5 and see how we can use that binlog data to replicate to another cluster. And then of course we are going to set up the same thing on another cluster setup. All right guys, hope you enjoyed it, and hope you liked what you saw. We will see you in the next video. Enjoy guys, take care, bye.